Istanbul, a city that is more than just a place on a map. It is a living, breathing character, a labyrinth of memory and ambition. Its ancient streets whisper tales of sultans and spies, of merchants and mystics. In the grand narrative of this city, there are figures who shine brightly for a moment and then fade. But a select few become permanent fixtures in its folklore, their stories told and retold, blurring the line between person and myth. Among these legends, none is more paradoxical, more controversial, or more astonishingly successful than Matilde Manukyan. On one hand, she was a Republic of Turkey's most celebrated taxpayer, a woman lauded by prime ministers and decorated by the state for her immense contributions to the national treasury. She was a real estate empress, the owner of a staggering portfolio of properties that stretched across the city. Yet, the foundation of this entire, glittering empire rested upon a single, taboo word: brothel. How did a woman of aristocratic birth, educated in exclusive French schools and groomed for a life of quiet refinement, descend into the shadows of Istanbul's underworld only to emerge as its undisputed queen? This is the story of her impossible journey, a life that began in a high society dress shop, climbed to the zenith of both infamy and respectability, and culminated in a legal war over her fortune that rages to this day. This is the definitive story of Matilde Manukyan. Her story begins in 1914, in the cosmopolitan heart of a fading Ottoman Empire. Matilde Manukyan was born into a privileged world. As the daughter of a prominent Armenian family, her upbringing was one of culture and comfort. She was educated at the prestigious Notre Dame de Sion, a bastion of French learning and Western discipline in Istanbul. There, she mastered languages and absorbed the etiquette of high society, her future seemingly mapped out for a life as a sophisticated matriarch in the city's elite circles. True to her upbringing, her first career was one of elegance and artistry. She became a sought-after couturier, a high-society tailor whose exclusive studio catered to the wives of diplomats, industrialists, and pashas. She married, had a beloved son named Karopi, and settled into a life of comfortable, respectable luxury. But fate, with its characteristically cruel sense of irony, had other plans. The sudden death of her husband shattered this idyllic existence. Overnight, Matilde became a single mother, facing a future of uncertainty. The responsibility of securing her son's future now rested solely on her shoulders. It was in this crucible of grief and necessity that the single most important event of her life occurred. She had inherited several properties from her father, among them a building in the rough-and-tumble port district of Karakoy. Its tenant, who ran a licensed brothel, had fallen behind on his rent. Faced with losing his business, the man made a desperate, unconventional proposal. In exchange for the debt, he offered her a partnership in the establishment. This was a crossroads. For any other woman of her standing, the offer would have been unthinkable, an insult to be dismissed. But Manukyan was no longer just a society woman. She was a survivor, driven by a fierce determination to provide for her son, and perhaps guided by a nascent business acumen she never knew she possessed. She accepted. She stepped across a threshold from which there would be no return, trading the world of silk and lace for the gritty reality of Istanbul's underworld. Manukyan did not merely enter this world, she conquered it. With a mind as sharp as her tailor's needle, she observed, learned, and quickly identified the inefficiencies and chaos that governed the trade. She approached the business not with emotion, but with the cold, calculating logic of a CEO. She instituted a system, a set of rules that would become her trademark. It was absolute. Hygiene became a priority, a revolutionary concept in the often squalid conditions of the time. The health of the women working in her establishments was monitored, not out of altruism, but out of a pragmatic understanding that healthy workers were productive workers. And above all, every single lira was accounted for. This ruthlessly professional approach was her competitive advantage. The single brothel she had reluctantly partnered in soon became 2, then 10, then a sprawling network. She eventually controlled, directly or indirectly, all 37 licensed brothels in the infamous Sarafa and Elegiac streets of Karakoy. But her true genius extended beyond management. She understood a fundamental principle of wealth: money must not sleep. The torrent of cash that flowed from her Karakoy empire was immediately put to work, not through illicit schemes, but through legal, tangible investments that would form the bedrock of her legitimate fortune. She began to systematically acquire real estate, buying up apartments, entire office buildings, and hotels. She diversified into other cash-heavy businesses, most notably acquiring a massive fleet of commercial taxi medallions, a stable, lucrative asset that solidified her financial power. Then came the 1990s, a decade of economic instability in Turkey where tax evasion was a national sport. As the government struggled to fill its coffers, a surprising hero emerged in the financial pages of the newspapers: Matilde Manukyan. Year after year, she was crowned the tax champion of Istanbul, outpaying the country's biggest industrialists and bankers. She did this for 6 consecutive years. This created a stunning paradox. While moralists condemned her trade, the Ministry of Finance celebrated her. She was publicly honored by government officials, receiving plaques and accolades for her civic duty. The very state that regulated her controversial business now lauded her as a model citizen. Her tax records became her greatest shield, an armor of respectability. She was too valuable to the treasury to be troubled by the minor inconveniences of police raids or moral crusades. She had successfully transformed her underworld profits into a legitimate, state-sanctioned empire. Matilde Manukyan passed away on February 17, 2001, at the age of 87. But the saga was far from over. In fact, her death ignited the third and perhaps most dramatic act of her story. The colossal, almost mythical fortune she left behind triggered one of the most complex and vicious inheritance battles in Turkish legal history. The ink on her death certificate was barely dry when the claimants began to emerge. Her sole legal heir was her son, Karopi, but the sheer scale of the wealth attracted dozens of others, each with a story, each claiming to be a lost relative or secret heir. The courts were flooded with lawsuits, forgeries, and dramatic testimonies. The battle over the Manukyan fortune became a public spectacle, a testament to the chaos that such immense wealth can unleash after its creator is gone. So, in the final analysis, who was Matilde Manukyan? The question has no simple answer, for she was a woman of profound contradictions. Was she an exploitative madam who built her fortune on the backs of vulnerable women? Or was she a brilliant, self-made businesswoman who played a flawed system with masterful skill, a survivor who bent the world to her will, power, and survival against all odds? Whether a saint or a sinner, one fact remains undisputed. Matilde Manukyan was an unforgettable force of nature, an enigma who wrote her own rules and carved her name permanently into the history of a city that has seen it all.